Hello friends, welcome back to the part 2 of the interpretation of the ECG or electrocardiogram. In this ECG, we will see what are the clinical utilization of the electrocardiogram and what benefit we can give to the patient. So there is a system of reading or interpreting the electrocardiogram whenever you get a ECG paper. Now a person comes either with a shortness of breath, with a chest pain, weakness or any complaint, and you have obtained an ECG. As in the last video, which was the part 1 of the interpretation of the ECG, I have mentioned that first of all you need to read the name of the patient, the date it was done and also the time when it was taken. And you also need to look at the basic parameters of the machine, which is the paper speed 25 millimeter per second and the voltage or sensitivity of the machine. Now after reading these basic things, you will have to look at the ECG in a very systematic way. When I say systematic way, let me first tell you how you are going to read the ECG. First of all, we'll check the rate, then rhythm, then axis, then ischemia or infarction, then hypertrophies, then bundle branch blocks, and lastly heart blocks or the AV nodal blocks. And there are some miscellaneous things which we may talk or I'll talk in some other videos. So in order to calculate the heart rate from the ECG, which is very important from clinical point of view of a patient, there are 4 methods. First of all, you will select 2 R waves which are contiguous. Then you count the number of large boxes in between these 2 R waves and you will divide 300 by this number. Say this is a X, then you will divide 300 by X. What is X? X is the number of the large boxes between 2 R waves, and that will give you a heart rate from the ECG. Second method of knowing the heart rate is you will count the number of small boxes between 2 R waves and then you will divide 1500 by that number. That can also give you the heart rate. The third method of calculating the heart rate is first you select from the rhythm lead. What is the rhythm lead? Rhythm lead is lead 2, which is right in the direction of the cardiac axis. So, and it is also looking at the activity of the SA node. So it is the best lead to know the heart rhythm. So you select the lead 2, and because it's a longer lead, you select a part of the lead 2 which is equal to 6 seconds. How you can do that? One small box in duration is equal to 0.04 second. One large box which contains 5 small boxes is equal to 0.04 into 5 is equal to 0.20 second. So this way, if you select 5 large boxes, then 5 into 0.20 will be 1 second. This way you will select from the rhythm strip a portion of 6 seconds and you will count the number of R waves in that very selected segment of the lead 2. Then whatever is the number of R waves, you will multiply it with 10. That will give you the heart rate. This is the third method. The last or the fourth method of calculating the heart rate using the ECG paper is you will have to cram or remember certain digits. What are those digits? These are 300, 150, 100, 75, 60, 50, 42, 37. So once you have either remembered these digits or crammed it, then you will first identify an R wave which is right on top of a thick line. You will mark it as the reference R wave. Now after you have selected a reference R wave, then the next R wave which is located on the left side of the reference R wave, that next R wave doesn't need to be on the thick line. Wherever it is located, then in between these two R waves, you will pinpoint the thick lines, and on those thick lines you will start dropping these digits. Like on the first R wave you will drop 300, on the next you will drop 150, then 100, and depending upon the location of the second R wave you will count that these digits will tell you what is the heart rate. Now take this example. Now in this ECG, heart rate is more than 100. How we found it out? We selected a reference R wave, then on the left side of it we had another R wave, and we dropped 300, 150, 100. This is more than 100 but less than 150. It falls somewhere between the two. Now take this another example of ECG where we see the heart rate is less than 100. First we selected a reference R wave, then on the left side of this reference R wave we have another R wave, and in between these two R waves we will drop the digits on the thick lines 300, 150, 175. So it is falling somewhere less than 100. So this is how you can use the fourth method to calculate the heart rate. After calculation of the heart rate, the next one is after rate it comes the rhythm. What we mean by the rhythm? Impulse is generated from the SA node, it passes through the AV node, and before that it causes the depolarization of the atrial muscle, which are represented on the ECG paper as a P wave. And after passing through the AV node, it goes through bundle of His, bundle branches, and it causes the ventricular depolarization, which we have it as a QRS complex. So before each QRS complex there will be a P wave. So before each ventricular depolarization there will be a atrial depolarization, and it happens at a very regular rate. For example, if someone has got a heart rate of 72 beats per minute, then exactly after every 0.8 second there will be a impulse transmission. So if you want to talk about the rhythm, then you need to find a P wave before each QRS complex, and R to R interval will be regular. This is known as a normal sinus rhythm. What does that mean? That it is being produced by the sinus node. So that is why we call it the normal sinus rhythm. And against this normal sinus rhythm, we explain all kind of arrhythmias. When there is absence of the rhythm, we call it arrhythmias. For example, in what happens in atrial fibrillation, there is no discernible P wave and R to R interval becomes irregular. That is atrial fibrillation. How you can actually on the ECG paper know whether the regularity of R wave is there or it's irregular? There are two ways. Either you can use the caliper and you can put it on different R to R intervals, and that will tell you whether the R to R interval is regular or irregular. Secondly, you can use a piece of paper. You can just make some marking over there on 2 or 3 consecutive or successive R waves, and then you can place these dots on different R waves that will be parallel to each other. So that is a way of knowing the normal sinus rhythm. Then comes the axis. In the last video I had told you that the normal axis is around like positive 60 degree, and it falls around at the lead 2, which is also known as the rhythm lead. Why we call it the rhythm lead? Remember, lead 2 is located between the right arm, which has got its negative pole, and left leg, which has the positive pole, and it is passing right in front of the SA node. So SA node is the one which is making the rhythm. So we call it the rhythm lead, and axis is located right in this direction. So if we want to know about the cardiac axis, you need to have 2 leads basically. One is the lead 1 and one is lead 2. Lead 1 is located between the right arm with its negative pole and left shoulder with its positive pole, because these two are the dipolar leads which are looking at the heart in the frontal plane. So remember these 2 leads whenever you are to find out the cardiac axis. Whenever we have talked in the previous or the part 1 of this ECG video that whenever the wave of depolarization is moving towards a particular electrode or positive electrode, it will make a positive deflection. But when the wave of depolarization is moving away from a particular electrode or a positive electrode, it will generate a negative deflection. So in order to, and normally what happens that cardiac axis is located in such a way that wave of depolarization is moving towards lead 2 and lead 1 as well. So in a normal cardiac axis, we see that lead 1 is a positively deflected lead and lead 2 is also a positively deflected lead. But what happens whenever there is a left axis deviation? For example, I give you two very important examples. If there is a myocardial infarction, if the left lateral wall is involved, or if there is a long-standing hypertension which is poorly controlled, then there will be left ventricular hypertrophy. The cardiac axis will shift towards the left side. Now when it is shifting towards the left side, it is moving towards lead 1 more than lead 2, or it is going, the wave of depolarization is actually going away from lead 2 because lead 2 is located at a farther distance now. So lead 1 will stay positive as before and lead 2 will become negatively deflected. So this is known as left axis deviation, and I have given you the examples that long-standing systemic hypertension or myocardial infarction causes left axis deviation. But think of example of a smoker or a COPD person, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease person. They have got pulmonary hypertension, which causes, because now the right ventricle has to push the blood against a narrowed pulmonary artery, so it becomes hypertrophied. So there is a right axis deviation. The wave of depolarization now is going more towards the right side and less towards the direction of the lead 1. So wave of depolarization is going away from lead 1, which becomes negatively deflected, and wave of depolarization is moving towards lead 2 as before, that stays positive. So this is known as the right axis deviation. And what is the best example? Pulmonary hypertension. Lastly, there is a extreme right axis deviation or no man's land. What happens in that case? Both lead 1 and lead 2 will be negatively deflected, and it happens in case of the pacemaker insertion or ventricular tachycardia. So this is the way to know the cardiac axis by looking at the ECG. There is another very important method of just circle making, but that will be the beyond the scope of this video. I'll make a separate video on that thing, because that way, using a 360 circle, you can tell how many degrees the cardiac axis is deflected. But that is a complicated way, but I'll make another video on it. So we have, up till now we have determined what is rate, rhythm, axis. Now let's talk about the ischemia and infarction. How we can detect ischemia and infarction from the ECG paper. First of all, let's exclude AVR from this phenomena. AVR is located at a position where it only looks at the wave of depolarization going away from it. All those people who are quite expert in reading ECGs, only they can understand the role of AVR in looking at the posterior wall or the right side, but that is again beyond the scope of this video. Let's keep the things very simple. Now we will divide the electrodes or ECG leads in certain groups, which will be looking at the certain portions of the walls of the heart, and those whenever there is ischemia in those walls, then we can ascertain that a particular coronary artery is involved, because coronary arteries are supplying specific portion of the walls of the heart. What are those groups of the leads? First of all, let's talk about the limb leads. Lead 2, 3 and AVF. They are located in a way that they are looking towards the inferior wall of the heart. Now take example of your heart as a fist. If you place it here and lead 2 is located here. Here lead 2 is located, here lead 3 is located, and AVF is located here. So these three leads are looking at the heart from down above. So these three limb leads, they will be representing any change in the inferior wall, which is mainly supplied by the right coronary artery, and in some cases it is supplied by the left circumflex. But in majority of the cases, right coronary artery supplies inferior wall, which are being looked at by the lead 2, 3 and AVF. Now lead 1 is located here and AVL is located here on the right shoulder. And if this is the heart, it has got an inferior wall, a lateral wall and an anterior wall. Then lead 1 and AVL are looking at the heart from the lateral side or the lateral wall, which is being supplied by the left circumflex artery. Now the chest leads, they are located right in front of the heart or its major wall, which is the left ventricle, and we have divided the chest leads in the last video in 3 groups. V1 and V2, they are located right in front of the right ventricle. Lead V3 and V4, they are looking at the septal area, and lead V5 and V6, they are looking at that part of the left ventricle which is more lateral to the center. So lead V1 and V2, they are known as anteroseptal leads because they look towards the right ventricle and the septum, because wave of depolarization moves from left side towards the right side and in the septum, and septum is the first portion of the myocardium or major ventricle which is depolarized. So V1 and V2 are known as anteroseptal, V3, V4 are pure anterior wall, and V5 and V6, they are anterolateral wall, they are anterolateral leads. So the final conclusion about the grouping will be lead 2, 3 and AVF, they are the inferior leads. Lead 1, AVL, V5, V6, they are looking left lateral wall, and lead V1, V2 anteroseptal, and V3, V4 are interior wall of the left ventricle, which is being supplied by the left anterior descending artery. So if you are to look for some ischemic changes in the ECG, then it should be very clear in your brain or in your head what group of the lead may be involved, because at least 2 of the leads are 2 contagious lead or consecutive lead needs to be involved in that particular change for qualification as ischemia or MI. And contagious leads mean 1 is contiguous to the lead AVL, 2, 3 and AVF, they are contiguous leads, and V1 to V6 are contiguous leads. So you need to find the change which I am telling you right like now, at least in 2 of the leads. What are those changes? You can have a normal ECG, but even 25% of the patient who have cardiac problem, they have got a normal ECG, but if they have the risk factor, then you are to follow them clinically and you will have to have your subjective assessment. But in 75% of the remaining patients, either there can be a T wave inversions, which is downward movement of the T wave, or there can be a depression of the ST segment, or there must be a change in the ST segment in a way that it is going lower than the isoelectric line or the baseline. So these 2 things tell you that either there is a ischemia or the reduced blood supply, or there may be some damage to the myocardium of the heart, which we call the myocardial infarction. And cardiac enzyme detection will explain or will give you the final answer, because if cardiac enzyme is positive along with these changes, we call them the non-ST elevation myocardial infarction. But if cardiac enzymes, they turn out to be negative and these changes are present in the ECG, then this is unstable angina. And in both unstable angina and non-ST elevation MI, the coronary artery is partially occluding the flow of the blood towards the myocardium. But whenever you see ST elevation, which is the ST segment is raising higher than the J point. J point is the point where the S segment comes back and it becomes isoelectric line or straight line. If this J point is drawn up and there is ST elevation, then it means that there is a major risk to the myocardium. It can be because of the ST elevation myocardial infarction, which means the coronary artery is completely occluded and you need to reopen it very immediately, either by some medications like the what we call the thrombolytic agents, alteplase, reteplase, streptokinase, or by doing some primary PCI and angioplasty. Or it can be because of the pericarditis if the ST elevation is in all the leads, or it can be because of the ventricular aneurysm. So using the ECG paper, you can also find out if there is a ischemia or myocardial infarction going on. Say if the change is in lead 1 and AVL, we will call it lateral wall ischemia, and probably left circumflex artery may be involved, which we can find out by using the angiography. If the change in lead 2, 3 or AVF or at least 2 of these leads, then the wall which is compromised or the wall which is ischemic is the inferior wall ischemia, and there may be a clot in the right coronary artery. And if there are changes in V1 to V6 or at least 2 of the contiguous leads, then the problem is going on with the anterior wall. We will call it the anterior wall ischemia, and the problem may probably be in the left anterior descending artery, again which we will be finally diagnosing on the angiography or coronary angiogram. Now the last thing about the ischemia and myocardial infarction. In the last video we have discussed that in lead V5 and V6 there is a very small first downward deflection, which we call the physiological Q wave, because it is less than 1 millimeter in size, or at least 1.5 millimeter, less than 1.5 millimeter in size. And the same, why we have this downward deflection? Because the wave of depolarization of the septum is going away from V5, V6 at the beginning of the ventricular depolarization. And this very wave of depolarization, which is very small, of the septum is going towards V1, V2, they have a very small R wave. But whenever there is an old MI or someone has got myocardial infarction in the past, because most of these people are diabetic, sometimes they don't feel the pain because of neuropathy, and you find a Q waves which is deeper than 1 to 1.5 millimeter, or 1 small box to 1.5 small box is deeper than this much, then this is known as the pathological Q wave. And this presence of this pathological Q wave signifies old myocardial infarction. So this is ischemia and myocardial infarction. So up till now we have seen rate, rhythm, axis, ischemia and infarction. Now let's talk about the hypertrophies. What we mean by hypertrophy, there may be enlargement of the atria, which are smaller compartments, or enlargement of the ventricle, which are the larger compartments. First we talk about the enlargement of the ventricles. For example, there is a person who has got systemic hypertension which is poorly controlled, or has got a aortic stenosis. In both of these cases, a lot of pressure is being put on the left ventricle, what we call as the afterload, or the left ventricle has to work against a lot of resistance, so it enlarges in size. It becomes hypertrophied, which we call the left ventricular hypertrophy. And how we can assess that? By using the ECG paper. One small box height is equal to 1 millimeter. One small box depth is equal to 1 millimeter. This is what I have mentioned in the last video. Now, if we want to know about the left ventricular hypertrophy from the ECG paper, we'll have to select 2 waves, lead V1 or V2 and lead V5 or V6. If there is a deep S wave in lead V1 or V2, we will calculate its depth in millimeter by using small and large boxes, because the depth of large box is 5 millimeter. Then we will select R wave from V5 or V6, whichever has got a taller one. We will know its height in millimeter by using the same principle of the depth and height. Then we will add them up. If the S wave depth in lead V1 or V2, whichever is the deeper one, and the height of the R in V5 or V6, whichever is the taller one, adds up and becomes more than 35 millimeter, this is known as the left ventricular hypertrophy. So this ECG is an example of the left ventricular hypertrophy, and as I told you, this is how you can know of the left ventricular hypertrophy from the ECG. Now let's talk about the right ventricular hypertrophy, which happens in cases of the pulmonary hypertension, where we see narrowing of the pulmonary artery, and the right ventricle, which in a normal condition works as passively. It has to push against a lot of pressure or afterload. It becomes hypertrophied. How we know that? On the ECG paper, if there is a right axis deviation where we see that lead 1 is downward deflected and lead 2 is positively deflected, this is known as the right axis deviation. This is condition number 1. Then the condition number 1 for qualifying of the right ventricular hypertrophy is to have a tall R wave in lead V1. Normally we had seen that there will be a very small R wave because of the small depolarization wave coming towards V1 or V2, that will generate a small R wave. But when right ventricle is hypertrophied, then a larger wave of depolarization will be coming towards the lead V1 and V2, and it will make a large R wave. So whenever you find right axis deviation and a large R wave in lead V1, this is what we call the right ventricular hypertrophy. Now those people who have got right ventricular hypertrophy, they may have right atrial hypertrophy, or there may be stenosis of the tricuspid valve, which is located between the right atrium and the right ventricle. In that case also, there will be enlargement of the right ventricle. And how we can know that someone is having right ventricular hypertrophy? From the ECG. Normally the P wave, the height of the P wave is less than 2.5 millimeter or less than 2.5 small boxes. But in case of the right atrial hypertrophy, it becomes larger than that. We call it the peaked P wave or tall tented P wave, and it is because of the pulmonary hypertension we call it the P pulmonale. And if there is a mitral valve stenosis, mitral valve separates left atrium from the left ventricle, and there is enlargement of the left atrium, then this P wave in the lead 2 rhythm lead will become notched. It will have 2 notches. We call it the P mitral, because this is what happens with the patients of the mitral stenosis. So P mitral and P pulmonale from the ECG paper will diagnose the cases of the atrial enlargement or hypertrophies. So this is hypertrophies. Up till now we had seen rate, rhythm, axis, ischemia and infarction and hypertrophies of both the ventricles and the atria. Now let's move towards the blocks. There are 2 types of the blocks. One is the bundle branch block and one are the heart blocks or the AV nodal blocks. Why we call it AV nodal block? Because the problem is at the level of the AV node. Recall from the video 1, part 1, that AV node is a gateway from atria to the ventricle for the impulse to pass through it. It slows it down. And in the last video I mentioned one thing, that I will explain why there is a slowing. First, our atria, it fills with the blood, and that atrial depolarization is followed by the mechanical event of the ventricular contraction. Now 70% of the blood from the atria to the ventricle goes with the effect of the gravity, and only 30% requires the atrial contraction, which we call the atrial kick. That very blood, same blood, it goes to in the ventricle, and the ventricle right after depolarization they contract, which we call the systole, and it throws the blood to the rest of the body, and in case of the right ventricle towards the lungs. So because the same blood needs to pass from one chamber to the other, then there must have been some delay, because if both the atria and the ventricle they are contracting simultaneously, that blood will stuck somewhere in between these two. So the nature has provided that AV node to delay the traveling or journey of the impulse from the atrial portion to the ventricular portion. So AV node is the gateway where the impulse is slowed down. Normally the PR interval, which is from the start of the P wave to the start of the QRS complex, this is what represents the traveling of the impulse through the AV node, and this is less than 0.20 second or less than one large box. This is normal PR interval. But in case of the AV nodal blocks, we divide them in 3 degrees: first degree, second degree and third degree, and I'll tell very briefly. What happens in the first degree AV block? There is delaying of the impulse when it passes through the AV node. So PR interval, it prolongs. Whenever PR interval prolongs and becomes more than one large box or more than 0.20 second, we call it the first degree AV block. In second degree AV block, we subdivide it into Mobitz type 1 and Mobitz type 2. In Mobitz type 1, there will be progressive prolongation of the PR interval, or the impulse which is passing through the AV node will be progressively delayed till after third or fourth beat there will be a missed QRS complex. One third or fourth impulse will not be allowed to pass through it. So there is a progressive lengthening of the PR interval till the time that there will be P, there will be P, but there will be no QRS complex because impulse wasn't allowed to pass through it. So atrial depolarization happened before AV node, so there must be a P wave. But an impulse needs to be transmitted down the conduction system to depolarize the ventricle to have a QRS complex. Because it didn't happen, so we will not have a QRS complex. So there will be a missing of the beat when you check the pulse, and on the ECG paper there will be disappearance of the QRS complex. You will have a progressive PR interval prolongation, then P and no QRS complex, and it starts all over again. This is known as the Mobitz type 1 second degree heart block. Then there is a Mobitz type 2 second degree heart block, which is a dangerous one. Now the AV node has become more diseased. There will be no prolongation of the PR interval, but every now and then you will see that impulse is not allowed to pass through the AV node, and there will be missing of the beat, there will be disappearance of the QRS complex very oftenly. That will reduce the heart rate, and that can compromise the functioning of the heart, and patient can go into the hypotension, and there can be all sort of a complication. So this is known as the second degree, Mobitz second degree type 2 heart block. Now there is a last third degree heart block, we also call the AV dissociation. Now there is a complete blockage of the AV node. Atria are depolarizing on their own. Now the ventricle start depolarizing using either infranodal pacemaker or a ventricular pacemaker. Infranodal pacemaker, they generate impulses at a rate of like these are also known as the junctional pacemaker because of their location, at a somewhere like 40 to 60 beats per minute, and they generate a narrow QRS complex. But if it is the ventricular pacemaker which will throw impulses at a rate of 20 to 40 beats per minute, there will be a broad QRS complex. Because the atria are depolarizing at a rate of 60 to 90 times per minute, and now the ventricular will be depolarizing either at a rate of 40 to 60 or 20 to 40 beats per minute, there will be no association between the two. That is why we also call it the AV dissociation. Now the atria and the ventricles, they are divorced. they are no longer they are functioning together. So initially they are married. P is followed by the QRS complex, but here they are divorced. You will have to find out P and P after P, and you will have to find out QRS complexes separately. R to R interval will be regular, P to P interval will be regular, but P to R interval will be irregular. There will be complete disassociation between the P and the QRS complex. This is the complete heart block or third degree heart block. Both Mobitz type 2 second degree heart block and complete or third degree heart block, they require pacemaker, because otherwise patient will become hemodynamically unstable. Heart will not be able to generate the stroke at a normal level, and it will not be able to maintain the blood pressure, which is its basic function. So this is what happens in these two cases, and you need to have pacemaker. And before that you can give atropine as a vagolytic agent. You can give isoproterenol. You can start patient with the dobutamine to maintain the heart rate. So this is how these things are dealt. So up till now we had seen rate, rhythm, axis, ischemia, infarction, hypertrophies, then AV nodal or heart blocks, and lastly we will see now the bundle branch blocks. We had seen in the last video that impulse starts from the SA node, passes through the Bachmann tracts and enters into the atrial muscle to depolarize it. Then from there it goes to the AV node, and once it has passed the AV node, it enters into the bundle of His, and from there it goes to the through the septal branch into the septum, and the other goes towards the left bundle branch, which has got anterior and posterior fascicle, and right bundle branch, and ultimately ending up in the Purkinje fiber, which are embedded into the ventricular muscle. They depolarize the ventricular muscle and it causes the QRS complex. Now the QRS complex, because this impulse transmission is very fast, this QRS complex, they are generating a coordinated contraction or depolarization. So the normal QRS complex duration is less than 3 small boxes or 0.12 second. But in case of the bundle branch blocks, there will be some blockage in the either on the right side or the right bundle branch or the left bundle branch. So what will happen in both of these conditions, in both of these bundle branch blocks, one thing is common. There will be delay of impulse now towards the side of the myocardium where the bundle is blocked. For example, if there is a blockage on the right side or the right bundle branch is blocked, then this impulse which went through the left bundle branch, it causes the depolarization of the left ventricular muscle. It will have to come through the muscles towards the right myocardium, and then it will depolarize that part of the myocardium which is located on the right side. So that will delay the impulse transmission. There will be broadening of the QRS complex, and now the QRS complex will be broader than 0.12 second or broader than 3 small boxes. This is what you find in all of the bundle branch blocks, be it the right bundle branch block or the left bundle branch block. But in case of the right bundle branch block, you will find 2 R waves. There will be a small R wave in the beginning of the impulse or the lead. Then there will be a deep S wave, and of course there will be broadening of the QRS complex, and there will be another R wave which is taller than the initial one. This is known as the R prime. So this is called RSR pattern, or you can also call it the rabbit ear pattern. Whenever there is a broad QRS complex and RSR pattern is located in lead V1 or V2, we call it the right bundle branch block. Why we are looking at the lead V1 and V2 in this case? Because the right bundle branch is located towards the side of the lead V1 and V2, and right myocardium is located towards the side of the lead V1 and V2. But in case of the left bundle branch block, there will be broadening of the QRS complex, and then you will find an M pattern. There will be two R waves, very minute difference between the two, and broad QRS complex. That M pattern will be present in either lead V5 or V6. We call it the left bundle branch block. But sometimes there is a dilemma that you do find broadening of the QRS complex, but there is neither RSR pattern nor there is M pattern in V5, V6. Then you are confused what kind of bundle branch block this is. In any such situation, you will have to look at the lead V1. If there is along with the broadening of the QRS complexes, if there is a deep S wave in lead V1, then this is left bundle branch block. But if along with the broad QRS complex, there is a tall R wave in lead V1, this will be right bundle branch block. And these patients, especially that of the left bundle branch block, and if it is a new onset, it is taken as the ST elevation MI, and these patients also require immediate intervention like primary PCI. So this is about the bundle branch blocks. There are some miscellaneous, like if a person is suffering from the Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome, they will have a very short PR interval, and because if it is less than 0.12 second, and if there is an initial notch in the QRS complex which we call the delta waves, then this is a Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome. In patients of the hyperkalemia, you will find a very tall T wave, tall tented T wave, which denote hyperkalemia, but first you need to rule out the cardiac ischemia. And in case of the hypothermia or hypothyroidism, you can also find some specific waves which we call the Opson wave. And some patients do have some other things, like if you are dealing with ventricular tachycardia, there will be broadening of the QRS complexes and things like that, which obviously again they can be mentioned in some other video. So it was the part 2 and final part on the ECG interpretation, and I think it has given you guys some idea about how you are to interpret ECG as a starter. Thank you so much for watching the video.